Have you ever wanted to be Japanese Indiana Jones? Well, do I have the game for you. La Mulana technically released in 2011, but it's actually a remake of the original La Mulana, which came out in 2006. And in the space age of 2023, I'm still coming to terms with the fact that even though it's been over 17 years, at the time it was deliberately imitating games for the MSX home computer, which are about as old then as La Mulana is now. Well, existential crisis aside, La Mulana is a Metroidvania with a focus on puzzle solving, in the same way that a car is a big box of metal with a focus on going forwards. I should warn you that this video will spoil literally everything, so if you don't want that, stop watching. Also, the best way to experience La Mulana is to find someone who's already beaten it and get them to give you hints. But anyway. Now, when most people start the game, they're going to wander to the left, die to this guy, and then wander to the right, fall off this waterfall, and drown. You know it's pretty bad when the developers had to release their own walkthrough on how to actually get into the ruins. What you need to do is press down on this rectangle here and use a consumable item called a weight, and then you can fall into the ruins. But before you do any of that, you're going to want to go up here and get the shell horn, because it's pretty important. It's your sound cue for whenever you solve a puzzle. Yeah, imagine if in Legend of Zelda it made you unlock the jingle first. But wait, it gets even better. You know how I mentioned that this was a puzzle game? Well, the main way of solving these puzzles is by reading these tablets, but not only do you first need to buy the scanner, but you also need to buy the software that translates them. Then, and only then, are you allowed to start realizing that you have no idea what you're supposed to do next. Also, being able to read the map is another piece of software that you need to equip. Just the concept of being able to turn off the ability to read your map is flabbergasting. Who knows what that means, but maybe it's talking about this. Oh wow, now the elevator is moving. Hooray. And that's basically La Mulana. Let's just be clear, this game hates you, and it makes that very obvious with this switch. Honestly, I can't even call this bad game design. It's probably the most upfront way to make you shift your expectations. It's telling you, this game is unfair. Anyway, you're Lameza Kosugi, archaeologist extraordinaire, and you're exploring the ruins of La Mulana in search of the secret of life. Also, your dad is here, but we don't see him much. When you first start off, you talk to Elder Zelpud, who tells you a little about La Mulana. And then after that, his main purpose is mostly to spam you with emails which are useful about 10% of the time. We still love him, though. The controls are pretty retro, and by that I mean really bad. You have 4 main buttons, which are jump, main weapon, sub-weapon, and item, but that's not the problem. It's the jumping and air control. You jump like you're on the moon and have 0 control over your trajectory until you reach the apex of your jump, at which point you'll get a little control, but not much. Also, when you walk off a ledge, you just plummet straight down. You're not allowed to jump off of ladders either. The platforming in Marrow was buttery smooth in comparison. Thankfully, the game doesn't require much precise platforming, but it does take a while to get used to. So the first major puzzle is to push this block onto that pressure plate, except we can't get around to the other side. Any idea how to solve this? Well, we walk through the wall, of course. After that, we open the chest, which contains the Holy Grail. Yeah, that's the level La Mulana is operating on. You find the Holy Grail at the start. It's extremely convenient because it lets you teleport between previously discovered areas with absolutely no limitations. But eventually you'll realize that there's a reason for that, and that's because the game doesn't so much as have backtracking as it has backwards, forwards, sideways, windward, leeward, and widdershins tracking. We haven't even scratched the surface yet, and I cannot overstate just how cryptic this game is. This room tells you to be courageous, so naturally, you throw yourself into the spikes. Turns out they were fake all along, and our reward for doing that is getting the shurikens. By the way, Lameza is also a ninja. The shurikens are a consumable weapon you can throw. The main puzzle of an area is to try and find out how to make the Ankh appear, and this one's pretty easy. You just need to walk along this invisible platform and put a weight here. Just making the Ankh appear, however, isn't enough. You also need to find the Ankh Jewel, which is unlocked by breaking these tablets in the proper order. Get it wrong and you get zapped by the wrath of God. However, you'll find that a lot of these puzzles are multi-step. That sound means something else happened in a different room, but it's not gonna tell you which one. Surprise! It was over here, and it made this other dais appear. Yep, it's a boss fight. Around now is when you really start to feel the stiffness of the controls, but just smack it until it dies. Alright, on to Giant's Mausoleum. My favorite part about this place is this tablet, which if you scan twice will permanently put your game into hard mode. So, don't do that. As you can see, the game really likes to keep you on your toes. From a game design perspective, traps like this don't really add any depth to the difficulty since you can't even see them coming, but they're usually only a minor inconvenience, so it adds novelty, I guess? It really depends if you're the kind of guy you can sit back and be like, ha, you got me. But if every game was doing this, it would get old really fast. Well, here we are at the Grail Tablet, which means now we can warp here whenever we want. Another thing I should mention is the fact that, seeing as we can warp to the surface at any time and head to this hot spring to restore all of our health without penalty, getting hit by an enemy doesn't so much as add challenge as it adds another trek to the hot springs before immediately teleporting back. Also, enemies don't drop health and instead give you experience, which makes the blue bar under my health bar bigger. And when that's full, it gives you a full heal. But when you can get a full heal for free at any time with a little hike, it's not really that exciting. I know for a fact that I've visited this hot springs at least 100 times during my playthrough because I got an achievement for it. I've come to realize that the basic enemies in La Mulana are there to give you something to smack while you're trekking from place to place trying to solve puzzles. Fortunately, this ghost running a shop sells some Hermes boots, so now we can walk to the hot springs even faster. But just to clarify, if all the enemies were actually challenging, solving the puzzles would be even more of a nightmare, so I'm not complaining. Our main puzzle is to try and figure out which giant is which, like this puzzle that says strength lies at the foot of Futo. Well, if you know that this one's Futo and you press down, you'll put a weight on a hidden dais and get a health upgrade. Or you could have just pressed down on every giant, I guess. Beyond that, you're using this contraption to change it from star, sun, and moon, to change certain things in the area. But make sure you're out of the way when things change. Taking care not to die, we can see that this has achieved nothing. Well, this guy collapsed, and now we can climb this ladder. For some reason, picking this thing up activates a trap that locks us in here, but I don't know why, considering we can just teleport out with the Holy Grail. Oh yeah, by the way, connected to this place is another area called the Endless Corridor. True to its name, it's a corridor that's endless. Really all we can do here is talk to the Fairy Queen, but this area is for way later. La Mulana just likes to make all these areas accessible so you can see all 15 billion puzzles you've yet to solve while you're still struggling on the one and despair. Well anyway, setting the dial to the appropriate time of day made this dais appear. Which in turn makes the Ankh appear. But we can't actually reach it. This guy needs to be praying for that. So here's the second boss. It's this giant robot with his mighty rocket punch. It's pretty simple, you wait for him to punch, dodge it, and then smack him in the face. But you don't want to wait around too long. Unfortunately, simple doesn't mean easy, because the clumsy controls and questionable hitboxes makes it quite the challenge. Also, it doesn't help that the rocks which fall down from the ceiling are completely random and will conspire to knock you back every time. If you manage to smack him enough times, his face will come off and enter the second phase, which is, frankly, complete BS. He gets another rocket punch, which I've managed to dodge maybe like twice in my entire life, but the good news is, now that his face is off, you can just throw shurikens at him. Yeah, so I think I died to this guy at least 15 times. Compared to the enemies, the bosses in La Mulana are actually pretty hard. Once the high of beating a boss wears off, you realize that it didn't really accomplish much and you have no idea what to do next, so you start exploring the other areas. Spring in the Sky is full of water, which is poisonous and slowly drains your health, so don't go swimming around too much. In here we can weigh down this platform which reveals a dais, and when we put a weight on it, we unlock the caltrops, which are a lot more useful than they seem. If you try to explore much more, you'll run up against this waterfall which constantly pushes you down, so obviously we need to find something before we can pass. But if we go down here, we find this fish we can smack, and we can smack it so many times you start to question if you're actually accomplishing anything. But after a while, eventually it flies away and unlocks the chest with the Ankh Jewel in it. That's all we can do for now, though. Time to explore some more. The puzzles in this stage of the game are still mostly salient, but if you haven't guessed, that's going to change. It's actually really hard to make a video about La Mulana without it becoming an incomprehensible mess of puzzle checklists and disjointed rooms, but maybe that's okay because that's basically what the game is. Clearly I just need to charm you with my scintillating personality instead. There's a mini-boss here, but I defeat it by pooping some caltrops at it. Here's Inferno Cavern, another place to worry about. Don't fall in the lava or you'll regret it. At least they left a health upgrade just lying around. Or not. It also connects to the Twin Labyrinths, another really confusing place that we can't really do much with yet. Lava actually being a threat, however, is pretty short-lived, because by simply walking to the end of this area and solving a block puzzle, we get the Ice Cape, which makes it only deal a little damage. But beyond that, there's not much else for us to do here. And that's La Mulana, running up against a wall in 10 different locations and hoping you stumble into the solution somewhere. Back in the Temple of the Sun, our main puzzle is pushing this cart around. Then we make a quick detour over here, throw some shurikens at the pot, trying not to miss, stand here, unlock the dagger, which is a faster but shorter weapon than the whip, finish pushing the cart, and then struggle to find the Ankh Jewel. I could actually use the one I got from Spring in the Sky, but I'll need to find it eventually, so might as well be now. This guy is selling some software that lets you record the text from tablets so you can check on them at any time, and this is the only thing I'm actually going to lodge a formal complaint against, because you can only record 10 tablets. The problem is, it's an in-game solution to just writing it down in real life, which is unlimited. There is no reason for it to be limited. It wouldn't be so bad if not for the fact that if you want any chance of solving the later puzzles, you're going to need to study every tablet you find. The puzzles are still easy right now. It lulls you into a false sense of security, and you think that there couldn't possibly be more than 10 or 20 important tablets at a time. Yeah, well, there are. You should be recording every tablet you come across, in real life. Anyway, here's Mulbrook. We'll talk to her later. For instance, I've been playing for a little over 3 hours now, and despite being in one of the earliest areas, the puzzle this tablet is referring to is relevant about 20 hours from now. Well, the search for the Ankh Jewel goes on. There's a chest here, but I can't figure out how to open it. But you can actually scan a lot more than just tablets. This thing is also known as the Eye of Wedget, and this tablet just so happens to tell you to meditate under Wedget. Yup. And there's our Ankh Jewel. Yeah, so now we know what that cart was for. Say one thing about La Mulana, it's got memorable boss fights. The sprite work and animations of all the bosses is top-notch, and they all manage to be unique and have their own challenges. For all the anguish the puzzles put you through, La Mulana at least tries to pay it off where it counts. There's not too much strategy to this guy, apart from waiting for the right chance to strike. He'll occasionally charge you, and it really hurts when he does. He'll also shoot projectiles, but if you're lucky enough, you'll be able to block some of them with a shield, at least until it breaks. He's not as hard as the Golem, though. A lot of it comes down to how often he attacks and what kind of mind track patterns you get, seeing as whether or not you can actually attack him is entirely up to the whims of the random number generator. For some reason, defeating Elmac throws you into this part of the Twin Labyrinth that kills you in 30 seconds, and you'd think that you're supposed to do something here, but nope, the solution is to just leave. Well, that's 3 out of 8 bosses down, and it's only been 4 hours. How long could this game possibly be? He said, dread slowly creeping into his voice. This is around when the game starts to step it up, because up until now the Gate of Guidance, Giant's Mausoleum, and the Temple of the Sun could all be solved entirely within themselves, but from now on, the solutions to certain areas are going to be in other areas. Case in point, we've hit a wall in Spring in the Sky, and to get past it, we need to visit this shop in the Twin Labyrinths, which I totally overlooked because it looks a lot like these, which are everywhere and you can't go into. You need to buy this helmet. I don't really know how a helmet is going to stop a waterfall from pushing you down, but whatever, we're here. Up here's the Scale Sphere, which means we won't lose health while swimming anymore. There's still a lot of empty spaces to fill in our items. Then we go over here and kill this mini-boss, and I am consistently impressed with the sprite work that goes into an enemy that dies in a couple hits and is never seen again. Above him is the first of 4 seals, the Origin Seal. We can use it to unlock the matching seals left lying around La Mulana. We've got water flowing down here now, and by breaking this, and then smacking this thing as well, we can flood the Temple of the Sun, which lets us go in here to the Chamber of Extinction. But this place is pitch black, and according to universal game law, that means we're not supposed to be here yet. The good news is, whatever we did made the Ankh appear. This time we're on a boat, and the boss is some weird dragon lion fish thing. Its pattern is to pop out occasionally and do that. The only way to actually hit it is to ride on the wave it came up on and then jump, but actually doing that is way easier said than done because don't forget you have 0 air control going up. The way the level bends biases you towards the left or the right, making you either slam into it or drift too far to hit it. And the window when you're close enough to hit it and not get hit is extremely narrow. I dare you to try. Eventually, if you're any smart, you'll give up on hitting it that way entirely and then realize you can throw things at it when it's jumping through the water, so the strategy then becomes baiting it out and hurling caltrops at it. If you throw enough caltrops at it, it'll eventually start doing this attack where it shoots cheese balls at you. The boss is completely invincible during this, and if you're going around a bend, it's very hard to predict. You know, it was hard, but the satisfaction of mastering a really tough boss fight is really its own reward. After we're done with that, it spits us out back on the waterfall that we drowned at that one time. There's also a thing up here. It's another seal. And as of now, I was at a bit of a loss for what to do next, so I started wandering around the Chamber of Extinction in the dark and found this thing I could smack. Which opened this up and let us get the bronze mirror. Also with the seal we can wake up Mulbrook. She just gives out hints, really. But they never seem as useful as you want them to be. Eventually you'll realize what the bronze mirror was for as this thing in the wall suddenly opens up. And then you're somewhere different, and then it hits you. Even though we've got tons of areas that are still absolute mysteries, there's even more. There's an A side and a B side to every area. I'd say at this point in La Mulana, you're out of the tutorial section. So I always like to opine on some tangentially related topic while I bring you through these games, and normally I like to start earlier than 20 minutes into the video, but there is a lot to cover. But now I need something to talk about while I solve puzzles in the background. So today we're going to be asking the question, in the age of the internet, is it possible to have meaningful secrets and puzzles in video games? Well, no. Actually, kind of, but mostly no. There's a reason people aren't making many games like this anymore. Puzzle games, sure. Games with puzzles in them, sure. But not really puzzle-focused games, even though they used to be rather ubiquitous. Most of the earlier RPGs, like the Ultima and the Wizardry series, were packed with obscure puzzles, and giving someone a walkthrough was like chanting a magical spell. But beyond that, there were also the point-and-click adventure games like Leisure Suit Larry and Gabriel Knight, which were renowned for their pixel hunting and rubbing everything on everything else until it works gameplay. Plus, there were the aggressively rub-your-face-on-every-surface platformers like Milon's Secret Castle and Treasure Master. Really, back then, any game that wasn't an arcade action game was probably some cryptic puzzle nightmare. La Mulana is intentionally retro, so naturally it's got retro puzzle difficulty. I touched on this in my tower climb video, but just like difficulty, puzzles were also an excellent way to pad gameplay without also extending dev time. If you only had enough memory to fit maybe 6 areas, instead of making the player progress linearly through them, if you added a few flags and checks, which are practically free memory-wise, and then forced them to walk back and forth between the areas several times, well, you've suddenly created content out of thin air. Or so they seem to think. A lot of this was trying to make sure that the consumer got their money's worth in playtime, especially considering games back then would cost over $100 in today's money for games that most people wouldn't even play for free these days. Unsurprisingly, as the technology improved, this kind of content padding became less and less tolerable. Perhaps puzzles and adventures fell out of favor as more interesting mechanics began to appear, and rubbing things together until something happened just wasn't as appealing anymore. Regardless, despite being everywhere at one point, I don't think it's a controversial statement to say that they're pretty rare nowadays. Again, I'm talking about adventure games and puzzle-focused games of other genres, not straight-up puzzle games. The puzzle game genre is very much alive, but I'm talking about any game that locks its content behind puzzles rather than the puzzles themselves being the content. That's the core distinction, I think. Breath of the Wild has puzzles, but I think you'd really struggle to call the game puzzle-focused. In La Mulana, I'm not doing the puzzles for the sake of the puzzles themselves, I'm doing them to progress through the game. Who knows, maybe I'm just splitting hairs, because there's a bunch of somewhat adventure puzzle games that straddle the line, like the Talos Principle and the Witness. But the latest games I can point at that would really follow this formula would be something like Legends of Grimrock, and perhaps more recently, and to a lesser degree, Tunic. But that one deserves its own video entirely. It's really up to whether or not the person designing the puzzles was intentionally trying to make sure that anyone could reasonably solve it, or just shrugged and said, I don't care, because La Mulana is definitely the latter. Anyway, have you ever spent 100 coins on a silver shield only to find a tablet that says money can't buy the real thing, and then have it break? Just La Mulana things. I'd say the major puzzle right now is trying to figure out how to get into Eden. It's really hard to encapsulate the feeling of this game into a video, because at this point of the game, with so many possible paths open, you'll be warping all over the place in pure desperation, searching every last inch because you can't figure out what to do next. And that's what leads you to discoveries like this. I was just trying to kill the enemy, but I found a breakable wall instead. It brings us to this block-pushing puzzle, which unlocks the flares, which are pretty useful for lighting up the Chamber of Extinction. Basically, the lesson should be that if you're not whipping every wall you come across and checking for invisible walls everywhere, you're playing the game wrong. Though to be fair, the game does occasionally reward you for wall checking with some extra coins. And up here is the Shrine of the Mother, but we can't actually do anything here yet. Seriously, you need to check everything. I don't even know what that did, but hopefully it did something useful. And then, after the high of solving a puzzle wears off, the dread creeps back in, and you realize that you have no idea what to do next. This is around when you'd want to consult the notes you'd better be taking. When you do find something you missed, it often raises more questions than answers. This is clearly a place I haven't been yet, but there's nothing to do in here and going up here just brings me out. Also, if you use your weapon at all, it just kills you. After running around in pure desperation, I find another destructible wall I missed. Cool, it's another weapon. The axe is actually pretty useful because it has a very large area of attack. After some more desperation, I fall down here again and see that this floor is missing for some reason. That's another thing about La Mulana. Sometimes you'll just solve puzzles without realizing it. Down here is Anubis, and he's completely invincible though. All we can do is run away. Consulting my notes, I find something that says that I need the Book of the Dead in order to defeat Anubis, but I have no idea where that is. After some errant wandering, I decide to consult Mulbrook, only for her to tell me exactly what I already know. Or not. Okay, thanks. For once I actually know what to do with this. Because at the very start of the game, this guy said this. It feels incredible to actually be making progress for once. And our reward is the feather. It's a double jump. Can't have a Metroidvania without a double jump. And this opens up a few things we couldn't get to before. This thing lets us attack turbo speed. Also, it's important to note that not only are there destructible walls, but floors as well, and your whip can't hit the floor, so you need to use another weapon. Well, and here's the real Silver Shield. It's really useful since it blocks projectiles without breaking. There's also this puzzle, which I wouldn't have even bothered showing you if not for the ending of this video. But it gives us the crucifix, which makes us immune to one kind of enemy. Exciting. The double jump also lets us get up here, so we can buy the bracelet and, destroy pots in one hit. Awesome. Once you have the feather, you can also get this piece of software here, which is very useful because it lets you use the Holy Grail to teleport to the B-sides of areas as well. Honestly, don't know why you couldn't just do that in the first place, but here we are. There's a lot of hints scattered about on how to get into Eden, but the first thing we need to do is find Michael Jackson and scan him. Seriously, it's MJ. Then you just need to scan the areas where the other 3 hints lead you. And then put weights down in the right order. Getting the Fruit of Eden made this dais appear, so now finally we can get into Eden. Except Eden is dead. Welcome to Gate of Illusion. Fittingly, it's the B-side of Gate of Guidance. Up until now, I think most people could reasonably get this far, but this area aims to change all that. Like here, going left or right brings you nowhere. You need to scan this blue thing and then fall down here. And then you enter these warps and end up lost forever. If you're lucky, you'll realize that the only way to get out of this is to press down where this pot used to be. But then it just takes you back to where you've already been. Well, if you press left, you failed. It's an invisible wall behind a portal that you can only walk through if you come out the other portal. That is just a taste of this place. And seeing as I need something to talk about while I solve all of these puzzles in the background, back to our superfluous topic. There's a couple reasons I could imagine why this kind of game died off. Using your intellect to deduce the solution to a puzzle from a set of clues isn't an unfun concept, that's why there's still puzzle games. But that means it needs to pose an actual challenge. And since challenge is heavily based on intelligence, you run into the issue that for any given puzzle, someone's going to find it very easy and someone else is going to find it next to impossible. This isn't so bad when Sudoku number 1 is functionally similar to Sudoku number 12, and you don't lose much by quitting, but if there's a grand narrative behind the puzzles, people are naturally going to want to see it to the end, and either quit unsatisfied or get frustrated when they run up against their limit. Also, every game should have some kind of progression so it feels like you're actually going somewhere, and so the puzzles will probably get harder too. But unlike difficult games where you can develop skills during gameplay, you're probably not going to get much smarter while you're playing. You will pick up on certain things like La Mulana's tendency towards the invisible and breakable walls, which offers some meta progression, but the point stands. If your goal is to design a game featuring intelligent puzzles while also succeeding as a game, you're going to need to come to terms with the fact that complexity and accessibility are inversely correlated variables. As one goes up, the other goes down. And considering accessibility is the one that drives sales, you can guess which developers tend to aim for. Something like the Ace Attorney series is somewhat emblematic of this, insofar as its puzzles have always seemed to be enough. Enough to elevate it above a visual novel, but not enough to really halt gameplay and require a good old think. Well, it's not like I've played all of them, so maybe one of them is actually super confusing, but I digress. But of course, all this is predicated on the assumption that intelligence is actually a factor in solving the puzzle at all, which is much harder to design for than just making the solution an exercise in trial and error. Which leads me to reason number 2, they just plain sucked. There's bound to be someone watching this who has fond memories of playing Monkey Island when they were a kid, but even the creator of Monkey Island himself released a paper titled Why Adventure Games Suck way back in 1989, and Monkey Island itself was seen as an exception to the poor game design of adventure games. I really want you to conceptualize that adventure games have been dead longer than most people watching this video have been alive. While this topic isn't strictly about adventure games, it's impossible to ignore the parallels in this deductive game design it shares with things like La Mulana. The third reason I can think of is that most of the enjoyment of playing the game is derived from the dopamine hit of solving a puzzle, which are often few and far between. So you get this sinusoid of fun where between every peak of pleasure is a trough of boredom and confusion. Now please don't assume that I hate this kind of thing, because the puzzle solving in La Mulana is what drew me to it. I like to assume that I'm in possession of a brain, and that I enjoy using it. I'm not implying anything I've said here is apodictic, but merely an exploration into some trends I've observed. Well, that's all besides the point of my final reason, and you may have guessed it already, but it's the internet. The existence of walkthroughs and guides made beating these types of games feel less like an accomplishment and more like a test of discipline. Instead of trying to break through a wall to get to the other side, you're trying to break through a wall that you could just walk around. Maybe it's fun to break through the wall while it's still easy, but at some point you're going to run against one that takes a little more effort to break, and suddenly walking around starts to seem a little more appealing. And when the puzzles are the whole point, it feels like you're going through a checklist for the privilege to watch a movie, so you might as well watch someone else do it instead. Like me! Even if you break through all the walls on your own, yeah, you'll still feel proud of yourself, but maybe not as much as you would have if there wasn't a way to just walk around. Of course, you could just walk around the challenge of an action game by installing cheats, but that's a little more effort than just typing game walkthrough into Google. I'd wager most of you can't even imagine what it was like before online walkthroughs were everywhere. I'm not saying it's strictly a bad thing, it's just important to know that it was a much different time back then. This topic is especially interesting to me because I played Marrow a while back. Yeah, I bet you didn't think I'd get to mention Marrow twice this video. A Metroidvania so obscure that there were 0 walkthroughs anywhere at the time, and it had the same broken but ponderous design of the old days. And naturally, I got stuck a lot, and I hated it, but eventually I broke through and won. It really took me back, and I can't say it was an explicitly good experience, but it was certainly memorable, and maybe that's what people miss from their childhoods. Memorable games. Would you believe that we're not even halfway done yet? Clearly I'd need to find some more things to ramble about. Anyway, we're in the Tower of Ruin, which is the B-side of Inferno Cavern. I have no idea how you're supposed to solve this puzzle because I solved it accidentally. It feels weird seeing an Ankh Jewel again after like 8 hours, but clearly we're on the right track. But I've got no idea how to progress any farther in here. On top of all the tablets, you should be taking note of every dead end you come across, because it's hard to express in video, but at this point in the game, there's at least 10 areas I know of but don't know how to solve. Sometimes it's hard because you don't know if the reason you can't solve it is because you're missing an item, or because you're just dumb. But this time I actually do have an item I need. The Key of Eternity I got from the Gate of Illusion finally lets us enter the rest of Endless Corridor, only to shackle us with another bewildering puzzle. This one is really tough, but if you're extremely observant, you'll realize that the symbols have meanings in La Mulanese, and you need to discover the symbols corresponding to birth, life, rebirth, and ascension. Birth and life are easy because they're on the seals we found, but the others are harder. I think you're supposed to figure it out by the symbols also relating to the order of each area, but I just solved it by trial and error. And then the next level is a race against time. It's possible, and there's a Steam achievement in it for you if you succeed, but the real answer is to just go through the wall. The next level is just saw blades and pain. Nothing too special. Then you make this thing appear, and it chases you around, and then you gotta go over here and push this button, and then it chases you some more. Yeah, then you push this button, then you can actually kill it. So you kill this thing, then you kill the other thing, boom, you're done. Down here is another entrance to the Shrine of the Mother. I guess I haven't been keeping you up with the lore, but my favorite thing about La Mulana... favorite thing about La Mulana is that by solving the puzzles, it's pretty much impossible to not know the lore. Basically, the mother came from outer space, but she wanted to go back to space and used the secret of life to create several children and told them to send her back into space. But quite literally, your mom was so fat that each attempt failed. And finally, the 7th generation decided that it was impossible and created the 8th generation of humans, but kept them ignorant of the mother while they watched over the ruins. When you know what's going on, there's some cool set pieces, like the Tower of Ruin being the failed attempt by the 2nd generation of giants to send her into space. Discovering all this as you go along really makes it feel like an adventure. So anyway, despite going through that whole area, we didn't really accomplish anything. I read that one hint that said sleep inside the woman, but I can't even get in the woman. Life's hard. One thing about these kinds of puzzle games, and La Mulana especially, is when you get caught in the trap of, it can't be that, I already tried that, because it's only in pure desperation that you go back and start trying things you've already tried before. Like here, I saw that there was a room above this one on the map ages ago and tried to destroy the ceiling, and it didn't work. But now it does, and that's because it's not destructible until you kill the mini-boss and leave the room. Anyway, we got this thing, which we can bring to the Fairy Queen. I randomly landed on this thing, and then it suddenly started floating. That's cool, I guess. Then there's another mini-boss up here. Seriously, this game has an insane amount of mini-bosses. I could have sworn I tried this earlier, but apparently you can just walk through this wall. Your reward is the Earth Spear, the most useless sub-weapon in the game. Except for the one instance where you use it to hit this statue. And we're back in Inferno Cavern. You can see a dais move in the background, which for some reason ends up all the way down this tube of lava. Nevertheless, the Ankh has appeared. After an eternity of doing puzzles, it's the 5th boss, Vi. You gotta smack all its tentacles to make its eye open. Or I guess more specifically, make those weird imp things peel its eye open. It alternates randomly from extending out and shooting an eye beam at you to firing a mega laser beam that destroys everything including the platforms. It makes it much harder to hit with your whip. The best way to deal damage to it is to throw caltrops in its eye, but after a while it starts curving the beam, so even throwing caltrops is hard. By the way, don't stand on it. My personal recommendation is once you deal enough damage to get it to curve the beam, wait patiently on one side until some unbroken platforms can appear on the other side, and then stand on them and hope you get lucky and the eye extends so you can smack it. It randomly drops us into a separate part of the Chamber of Extinction, but guess what? There's not much to do here. After another hour of wandering around, I randomly decide to check out the waterfall in pure desperation, only to find that the entrance to a new area has appeared. Thanks, La Mulana. The Tower of the Goddess is the B-side to Spring in the Sky. Shockingly, it's a tower, and it's extremely fun when you get knocked off. This place is a bit of a hub because it leads into 4 different areas, except they're all blocked by statues right now. Which leads me to one of the biggest BS puzzles in the entire game. You need to figure out how to get water into the tower, and your only hint is this line. Well, if you've been really diligent, you'll know that this guy is Anunnaki. Since the hint says it's what he refuses to gaze upon, you might assume that it's this wall, but no, it's up here. And you'll notice that there's another one on the bottom right. Well, it says the place where the finger points, so I guess it must be talking about this. But try as you might, you will find nothing here. But you'll never guess. You need to press down on the pot. Yeah, I had to look up the solution to this one, and I feel no shame about that. I got pretty far on my own power, but even I have my limits. The end result is now this place is flooded with water and we can swim up here. Okay, I think I need to find something else to talk about. I'm always worried about the line between thought-provoking conversation versus Reddit-tier pseudo-intellectual sophistry, especially since this video is ostensibly meant to be entertaining. But what else am I supposed to talk about while this is going on? I chose La Mulana for this particular topic because it is extremely cryptic and actually one of the best arguments for the existence of guides, because without them I never would have been able to experience the end of the game. I'm reasonably confident in my intelligence, and I can tell you with zero shame that I solved maybe 80% of La Mulana's puzzles on my own. And when I said that in a thread once, people were like, damn, that's pretty good. There's a YouTube video from someone who beat La Mulana without any hints or guides, and it took him 260 hours to do it. And I've heard similar stories from others who attempted the challenge. La Mulana is interesting. It's something that dares to be exactly the thing that pushes most people away, and I appreciate that. The technical skill and the gorgeous pixel art on display shows that it wasn't just some hollow attempt to appear unique. It could have been anything, and it chose to be incomprehensible. It has its core of fans, which is why it got a sequel, but this video is about the first La Mulana. Again, I'm not here to make some sweeping judgment on what's good or bad, and while I do think La Mulana goes way too far into the puzzles towards the end to be reasonably completable, I still enjoyed my time with it. It's got a lot of heart. Which brings me to the second half of this topic: secrets. Except they're not really secret the moment someone discovers them and puts them up on the internet, and suddenly not doing the secret ending isn't considered the true ending. So, secrets, yeah. I consider secrets to be anything off the main path that's not required to beat the game. I think people are generally more forgiving towards obscurity when it's not required to win. To the average player, they're decently functional, since if they miss them, they won't know they've missed anything and feel the need to consult a guide. But rather than secret, it's probably more apt to call it hidden content at that point. And if you're just making content most people will miss and find later on the internet, your efforts are probably better spent making content everyone will see. For that reason, most secrets these days are generally small things like extra dialogue or little bits of lore. Anyway, since we got the twin statue, I'm trying to get through the twin labyrinths now. The twin labyrinths is weird because it contains its own B-side and everything is pretty much mirrored. Also, here's the katana, it sucks. See how easy it is to fall into the trap of I already tried that? Once we do that to both statues on each side, it makes some daises appear which lead us to the Ankh Jewel. The puzzle to make the Ankh itself appear is another one I solved accidentally, because you need to kill all the witches in the room to make the Black Witch spawn. But you need to leave her alive, except I left her alive because I was lazy. And then you need to go to the mirrored side and kill the White Witch. That's right, boss fight number 6 is Baphomet and her giant horns. She mostly just sits there in the middle of the field, alternating between fire, lightning, and projectiles. And I've still got no idea how you're supposed to dodge the lightning, because as far as I can tell, it either just hits you or it doesn't. So I was trying to get a healing fairy to make the fight easier, but I got a key fairy instead. And I remembered something that said I should bring one here, so I did. Now my attacks are all cool and glowy. Back to Baphomet. If you hit her enough, she'll stand up and enter her second phase. Seriously, I've mentioned it before, but the pixel art and animations really go above and beyond. Technically they're mixels and not pixels, because you can see how the animations appear to be tweened smoothly over sub-pixels instead of being restricted to an actual pixel grid, but it's still good. Some people complain about this sort of thing, but some people can also go away. Anyway, in her second phase, she teleports around and throws balls at you while spawning more witches to annoy you. She's not an easy boss, but at this point in the game, you've gotten a lot of health pickups and weapon upgrades, so we shouldn't need to resort to drastic measures like we did Bahamut. I feel bad for you if you had less than 32 health when that happened. Okay, we're actually getting towards the end of the game now. But that means we need to tackle the Chamber of Birth. And since I'm living in constant fear of the algorithm, I've got several words for this place that I'm not comfortable with sharing since most of them are 4 letters long. But the one I'm most eager to share is horrible. Seriously, up until now I've mostly solved everything myself, but this area broke me. You'll solve one impossibly hard puzzle only to get one screen ahead and immediately get stuck again. It doesn't help that the place is a nightmare to navigate since it's split between 2 areas you need to go through the Tower of the Goddess to access with a weight tax to go literally anywhere. Yeah, weights, the mechanic that totally needs to exist. I could spend at least an hour going over everything I hate about this place. Well, whatever. We've made it inside of the woman now, and you'll never guess the solution. You need to pause the game until Lameza sleeps on the pause menu. The Philosopher's Ocarina wakes up the 4 philosophers, who mostly give you lore, but also open up some new areas after you talk to each one. The order in which I'm doing these puzzles is very dynamic. It's difficult to give a true walkthrough of this game because it's this crazy complicated web of puzzles that requires other puzzles. It's still strictly linear since you need to do almost all the puzzles to win, but the flexibility is what makes solving the puzzles look so schizophrenic. Like these. These are the instructions for pretty much the final puzzle in the game, but I've still got 2 bosses to go. Here's another puzzle I hate. You need to be holding this talisman before you talk to Elder Zelpud. You can't just talk to him with it in your inventory. Turns out it belongs to your father, and he's still in the ruins. You can see him a few times, but he's really easy to miss. To progress much farther, we need to buy at least 100 coins worth of items from this shop before he tells us about another shop that sells a very important item, the Dragon Bone. Then we bring that to the Shrine of the Mother and put it on this guy's head, and suddenly all the bone walls disappear. But then there's this pillar that closes and it doesn't care at all about the Lamp of Time. And in another fit of desperation, you talk to Elder Zelpud and he says he might have a solution. And his solution is... well, I wasn't really expecting that. We got our father's diary, but unfortunately, Elder Zelpud... just kidding, he's fine. And then he gives us something to open that cursed chest we found. I don't know why he didn't just give us this earlier, but whatever. Oh god, there are still so many puzzles left. Let's see, what else can I talk about? Okay, video game secrets. What if you wanted to leave clues in your game to a secret so obscure that you expect everyone to miss it, until an entire team of dedicated fans come together to figure it out as some sort of community building exercise? Well, you can't really, and that's thanks to data mining. I'm sure you've all heard of it before, and it's impossible for me to talk about this topic without recalling the time that Edmund Macmillan tried to add a secret character to the Binding of Isaac hidden behind several layers of clues, only for the steps to unlock it to be data mined within 106 hours. Not a lot of people seem to know what data mining actually entails in a game context, but put simply, it's digging through the game's data. It usually starts with sifting through media files until something like lost.jpg jumps out at you, and from there it's a matter of using memory hacks and resource monitors to try and find what parts of the code call that media file into memory. Then when you find it, you can start looking around that part of the code to try and find the flags, which is to say, the things that the code checks on to see if you're allowed to have the lost. Then bada bing bada boom, you've discovered how to unlock it without ever looking at the intended puzzle. So why don't they just hide these files and their code? Well, they've tried. The problem is, to be able to run a game, your computer kind of needs to be able to see it. And that means, so can you. So then they're left with the option to try and obfuscate the code and make it more difficult for humans to read. But if, for example, you were running a resource monitor on your RAM and you saw that a certain variable changes whenever you take damage, well, you found where the game stores your health. And if you were to force your own variable into that spot with some external software, congratulations, you've created an invincibility cheat. Even if the code's hard to read, you'll still be able to narrow it down, because, trust me, programmers are used to looking at incomprehensible code. So what if we encrypted everything so no one could read the code at all? Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, since it needs to run locally on your computer, that encryption key needs to be stored on your computer. So it's another case of using memory hacks to find where the computer starts looking whenever it wants to decrypt the files and then finding the key there. If you were so determined to have deep hidden content, you would need to make the game send and receive encrypted data from something you control, like an external web server. But that means it would need to be an always-online game, or at the very least disable that content when you didn't have a connection. But the existence of selectively encrypted information would definitely raise some eyebrows. There's also DRM software like Denuvo that can thwart a lot of memory hacking by essentially running the game in its own virtual machine that you're not allowed to peek inside while it muddles things behind the curtain. But seeing as games running Denuvo can still get cracked, it's no guarantee your secrets will remain secret. If people care enough, they'll find it. So really, the secret to having a truly cryptic game is to make sure no one cares about it. The point of this whole aside is that making true secrets is not impossible, but at least more effort than it's worth. Probably better to focus your efforts elsewhere. You can have stuff that's not immediately recognizable by data mining, like a hidden message encoded into the music only visible with a spectrogram. So don't get me wrong, there's a lot of avenues to actually hide things. There have been games that manage this community sleuthing thing, like Inscription and its ARG, but the important distinction is that one was carefully controlled and the first steps were data mined. People just pretty much stuck their fingers in their ears. Also, some steps were given out on physical floppy disks and hidden on other games. I think there were also some shenanigans with Five Nights at Freddy's, but I'm not young enough to care about that. There's also some secrets that only exist because of data mining, like Gaster from Undertale, I guess. But more than likely, it wasn't actually a secret, it was just some cut content until people started making theories about it. Okay, that was like 4 minutes of rambling. How many puzzles we got left? Well, I'm in the Dimensional Corridors, which is sort of like a boss rush because your Holy Grail doesn't work and you need to fight multiple bosses at a time before you can go back and heal. It's probably the only place where the experience bar matters. Have I mentioned how many mini-bosses there are? By the way, I made a mistake, because the only way to get to that ladder up there is to use the boss's water pillar attack to jump off of. If you kill the mini-boss and save, you will forever miss the final health upgrade. Except I looked it up online, and thankfully you can cheese it with the Lamp of Time. Except failing this area means you need to do it again. Well, you'll notice that we've killed 10 out of 11 mini-bosses, but where's the 11th? The map shows a room below here, but the border is pink, which usually means that it's not readily accessible. Search for destructible or invisible walls all you want, but you will never find it. Here's the solution. You need to attack left and then attack right in these 4 very specific areas in the correct order. I have no idea how you're supposed to figure that one out on your own. Even knowing the solution and looking at the hints, it still barely makes sense. Anyway, here's the hidden 11th mini-boss. These mini-bosses are a lot harder if you didn't find the fairy clothes that have all non-boss damage. Hooray, it's the Ankh Jewel. And defeating all 11 mini-bosses made the Ankh appear. Now we need to fight Tiamat and her enormous hair. All you can really do is stand beneath her and repeatedly hit her with the axe. She fires all kinds of projectiles and laser beams at you from her weird hair rings, and you're probably better off just jumping and doing damage to her than trying to dodge. Whenever you deal enough damage to her, she gets up and becomes increasingly angry and launches even more attacks. And I recommend standing under the platforms for this attack. She looks a tad miffed. You might die once or twice, but at this stage of the game, you've probably got maximum health, and you might even have the software combo that makes your axe deal extra damage, so even if you're just face-tanking everything, you'll eventually win. Also, shoutouts to the Angel Shield we found earlier for being so good at blocking projectiles. Even though we just beat Tiamat, we're not that far from defeating the last of the 8 bosses. We've only got a few things left to do in the Chamber of Birth. Like using the Angel Shield to get the Vessel, which we'll need later. Also, I hope you didn't forget to check for invisible walls. Seriously, there's a lot of invisible walls. Also, I completely didn't realize that you were supposed to use the Cog of the Soul on that tablet. That opened up all of these Clayman spawners, but there's one you can walk into, and it has the Ankh Jewel. Then there's this crazy Clayman. Get the Pochette key, put it in the slot, and then finally we can go over here. If you thought the game was done messing with you, you're wrong. Thank you for taking off 2/3 of my health right before a boss. Alright, take two. Oh, God. If you saved over your file after that happened, the game is now unbeatable. I recommend resetting. You need to use the Pachette key while you're in the plane, and suddenly, you're in a shmup. This boss is just insane, I'm not even sure what to say. It's some kind of a robot flying a death machine, there's stuff flying everywhere, and it's not even obvious where you're supposed to hit it. It does tons of damage on contact, and constantly knocks down pillars, which I swear are impossible to see coming and actually dodge. It's just crazy, I can't even begin to try and avoid any of this stuff. I don't know if I'm just too old or what. You eventually find the place where you can actually hit the thing, and it mostly becomes a battle of attrition as you try and kill it before it kills you. If you get a lucky cycle, though, it's pretty easy to win. This game is always full of surprises. Next time you win, make sure you smack it in the face. Well, that's all 8 bosses, except there's still the final boss, the mother herself. But if the rest of this video is any indication, getting to her isn't easy. To actually get to her, we need to learn all of the mantras and strike all of the wedges, which begins with fighting this mini-boss and her huge... orbs. Defeating her gives us the Jed Pillar, which is what we need to cast mantras. Also, we need to put this thing here and then scan this thing. With those combined, we can use mantras now. It sounds exciting, but really all it does is spit out some characters. Now it's just a matter of finding all the mantras, then finding their appropriate wedge. I've already got all the hints, but you need to do them in sequence. And that means chanting the mantra for that area in its appropriate spot. Only then will the next one appear. The puzzle on where to actually use these mantras is something you'll only understand if you read the manual and figured out how the geometry of the levels and their B-sides work. But the more straightforward solution is to chant the mantra in every single room of an area and its B-side until it works. We've got some time, so let's talk about the one thing I've neglected, the music. La Mulana has one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. The first track... Despite being decidedly in E-flat minor, the fanfare at the beginning is very upbeat, and instead of sounding melancholic, the main melody manages to sound more optimistic because it quickly passes over the minor keys to dwell on the dominant fifth, which is shared with its parallel major key. But the second half of the melody brings it back down to reality using the minor third and quite firmly resolves into E-flat minor. This mixture of optimism and trepidation is the perfect motif to mark the start of an adventure, and perfectly mirrors your own feelings starting the game. Another track I really appreciate is Giant's Cry. Even without seeing the Giant's Graveyard, I'm willing to bet that most gamers would immediately recognize this as an ice level theme thanks to its high tinkling chimes and minor scale. But it's got this powerful driving bass continuously pumping this oppressive energy into the whole thing, which really fits a frozen graveyard. It's nice to see for once an ice level portrayed musically as a wasteland instead of a wonderland. Oh, hi Shrine of the Mother. You're looking different since we last saw you. Yeah, so the mother is La Mulana, and she's waking up. Also, you would not believe how long it took me to realize that this thing was a ladder. We finally have to kill Beelzebub, but like all the mini-bosses, he is easily dispatched with the Lamp of Time. Except he's the only mini-boss with a second form. Well, just smack him a ton. Seeing as this is technically the Shrine's B-side, we couldn't teleport here until now. After going the long way around, we get blocked by this thing. It has a picture of a fairy on it, so we should probably consult the Fairy Queen. And here we are, the final boss room. The Mother's Ankh is pretty impressive. We don't have an Ankh jewel, but remember that nearly worthless sword we picked up a while back? No, not the katana, the key sword. Yeah, this is its only use in the entire game. All she does is spit balls, but that's just the first phase. If you didn't get the Medicine of the Mind earlier, the fight would end here. Also, this breaks our Holy Grail. Yeah, we're not here to kill her body, we're after her soul. This second phase, she mostly just floats around. She occasionally throws out these big waves of light, but you're completely safe on either side of the screen. Your main risk is getting hit while trying to hit her. Now is a good time to put that gun to use. The third phase is this spooky crying skeleton with her skeleton baby. There's lightning on either side of the screen, and she's too high up to shoot with the gun, so you best use your axe. Also, sometimes the baby decides to laser you. I don't think I've ever managed to dodge that attack. And here's her fourth phase. It's a water squid eye tentacle thing. The good news is we can shoot her again. The bad news is we're out of bullets. Here's her fifth and final phase. At first it seems like she's just floating around, but as you start damaging her, she's going to start picking up the attacks of every single boss. Whoops. Time to start over from the beginning, but we've got more bullets now. And we're out of bullets. Guess we gotta do it the old-fashioned way. Except the more attack she absorbs, the more she zips around. Actually getting to hit her and not getting hit yourself is pretty tough. Items like the flares help, but the problem is you can't use your shield while you're using an item. Looks like I gotta do it all over again. Clearly, this calls for drastic measures. Even with this many bullets, it is never a guarantee that she'll actually stand in a place where you can actually hit her. That would have been really dramatic if it didn't kill me. Thank you, gun. I couldn't have done it without you. As we all know, it can't be a Metroidvania without the self-destruct escape sequence. Our Holy Grail broke in the fight, so it's not like we can just teleport out. Thankfully, someone left us a rope. So when that opened up, I assumed it was a trap. And I made it all the way up here only to realize that you can't get out this way. I should have guessed that the endless corridor loops back bottom to top as well. I lost a lot of time, but then I'm like, wait a minute, that pot. It seems counterintuitive, but we don't want to go to the surface. Mulbrook gave us a hint earlier. We want to go to her place. And that's the end of La Mulana. Our reward for this incredible feat is a big running sequence with all the characters. Even Argus is here. So this is the end. Or is it? There is one final secret in this game, and it is the worst secret. Before you fight the mother, Mulbrook mentions that her father is the one who discovered eternal sleep and that he's still around, but he couldn't become one of the philosophers in the end. Probably on account of being the biggest scumbag on the planet. She mentions somewhere where it looks like no one can go, and that's here. He tells you that your reward, should you seek it, will be his forbidden treasure. Just a warning, this is the most insane line of puzzles ever devised. First, you need to sleep in front of this statue. It's night now. Then we talk to Elder Zelpud. But now we go over here to a place which was secret to begin with, go through an invisible wall, and then enter an invisible door. Here's the shop of no entry that Fairy was talking about. By going back in time, he means going into this secret area which brings you to the original version of the game. And now jump through this invisible wall. And enter an invisible door. The huge casket he's talking about is the room called Palanqu's Coffin. Welcome to this giant pool of lava. It's infinitely deep and you'll just fall forever until you die. That is, unless you know that exactly 19 screen transitions down, there is a destructible wall on the right side. I'm really getting sick of this guy. Just like in the Gate of Time, the entrance is here now. Which is why I made sure to mention this room when I got the crucifix a million years ago. Hell Temple, and it lives up to its name. There's about 1 billion rooms like this, and this place is massive. If you thought getting in here was hard, that was the easy part. At first it's mostly platforming and daises, but it gets worse. By the way, if you're ever knocked down, you go into a place like this that you can't leave until you kill everything. And your reward for doing that is going all the way back to the start. You'll be spending several hours in here. And of course it's got puzzles. The worst puzzles in the entire game. Not only does it have puzzles, platforming, and combat, it also has trolls. I can't even call them traps anymore. The best way to solve these puzzles is to ask yourself, how would a deranged psychopath build it? This isn't even close to halfway done. The only good thing about this place is that it plays the shell horn a lot, which at this point has probably been hardwired into your dopamine receptors. And you remember how much I complained about the jump controls? Well, nothing pairs better with clumsy jumps like precision platforming, enemies with projectiles, and pits that bring you back to the start. Finally, after an eternity, I get through this room. You want to know the best part about that? The game gave me an achievement for it. Yeah, go through the invisible wall instead. Honestly, Hell Temple is pretty weird because it's the only place with the platforming puzzles you'd expect out of a Metroidvania. And oh boy, everything's dark. Who could have seen that coming? At least this hell brings you right back to this room. Eat lamp, idiot. I hope you press up after going through that invisible wall because the tiny speck of goodness in the developers' hearts has given us a shortcut. To solve this puzzle, we need to equip guild.exe and put this block in front of this empty shop. And that gives us this bridge. Thankfully, we have the shortcut now. If you want to get past, you need to activate the trap first. And here we are at the actual hell. If you thought the platforming up until now was bad, you were wrong. Even if you make it down here, whether or not this thing shoots you off is a total crapshoot. You are completely helpless when you're on the walls. If you actually manage to get up here, don't even try. Just damage boost yourself with a bomb. Oh boy, more precision platforming. And you'll never guess where that pit leads. By the way, to get out of this room, you need to walk into the tablet. Ah, destructible platforms. I wonder what's at the bottom of that pit. This room is the bane of my existence, but I can't even be mad. This whole place is totally optional. The developers just know that some idiot like me is going to suffer through this just because it's there. I don't need to do this, but here I am torturing myself anyway. I've only got myself to blame. By the way, the other half of these platforms are invisible, so don't fall down. I'm having so much fun right now. After you beat those mini-bosses, you get to this room, which is impossible. To actually get past it, you need to sleep in front of all 5 hell signs. After you do that, you can press down on this eye and get in here. You need to scan all the tablets, which only tell you a single word each, but those correlate to the expressions on a skull in the background. Scan all 4 of those. Return to that room, which is easier said than done, and find this thing. Now go to the tablet at the start, and suddenly you're here. Go through this horrible platforming section for the 50 billionth time, and get back there. If it wasn't obvious, I've been using a guide this whole time. And our reward is a boss. I was actually lying when I said there was only one use for the key sword. Turns out there's 2. Yeah, so the real final boss is a slime. It does a ton of damage on contact, but just throw chakrams at it and hide on the wall if it gets too close. And there it is, the end of Hell Temple.
That makes me want to scream!
Yeah, so it took me about 20 minutes to get back. And I'd just like you to appreciate that you get to watch it at 100 times speed, but I had to play it. Yeah, so this time I'm not messing around. Roller shurikens will show the way. Finally, the treasure is almost in our grasp. And you have to wonder, what kind of treasure could possibly be worth it? Well, the ultimate clothes, of course. Yep, that's your reward. Honestly, I couldn't possibly think of a better reward. Those 5 hours were definitely worth it. Yeah, so if you didn't catch that, his dying wish was to see his daughter in a provocative swimsuit. Did I mention this game is Japanese? I wonder how Mulbrook feels about this. And she's gone. I guess I'll leave then. Let's kill the mother in style. By the way, this is what happens if you're trying to exit the normal way. Thank you, La Mulana, from the bottom of my heart. Alright, I guess I gotta wrap this whole thing up now. These puzzle-focused games are pretty rare nowadays, and that's because designing difficult but satisfying puzzles is hard, and your reward for all of that hard work is fewer people playing it. But fewer people playing something doesn't make it bad, and if La Mulana is any indication, there will always be a niche but dedicated group of fans. Despite everything, La Mulana is a really cool game, and it's got a killer soundtrack. Thanks for watching, bye.